Welcome to Tāwara Otuwai, Water New Zealand's podcast series. In this edition, we discuss how one area of Aotearoa New Zealand is tackling the often and historically vexed issue of how to develop a fair and equitable relationship between council and local mana whenua. Co-governance and shared responsibility for water and water assets has been one of the more misunderstood and controversial aspects of water reform. But it's a concept that isn't new. Joint management or treaty partnership agreements, especially around the management of natural resources and the environment, have been in place for many years. Take, for instance, the Whanganui River Arrangement, the Waikato River Authority model, and in Auckland, the Maunga Authority looking after the city's volcanoes. In recent years, the enshrining of Te Mana Otuwai into legislation has helped spur many councils into looking at how they will work with local iwi to meet their legal obligations. Te Tauihi, at the top of Te Waipunamu in the South Island, is one region where the council and local iwi have been working on a shared vision that they hope will provide the basis on which to move forward. Of course, working towards a long-term vision often contradicts what's happening on the ground right now, particularly in the area of wastewater and sewage treatment and disposal. In this discussion, Water New Zealand Chief Executive Gillian Blythe is joined by Jenna Neem, Chief Operations Officer at Tasman District Council, Anika Young, Tohu Taia o Turunanga o Ngāti Rarua, and Nathan Clark, General Manager of Regional Services for Nelson City Council, where Nathan manages the Nelson Regional Business Unit.
If I can turn to you first, Anika, why did Ngāti Rarua decide to work with the council?
I think we have an obligation as kaitiaki for Te Tauihu, for the top of the south, to ensure that our taonga tukui hoa are in a state that's fit for our future generations. So that's really the crux of why we're involved with council, is to mitigate any impacts on the cultural and environmental issues around wastewater.
And some of this has particularly maybe come more into focus following your treaty settlements.
I think iwi have had concerns around wastewater for quite a long time now, given the locality of where the wastewater treatment plants are within coastal marine environments. So the treaty settlements are they have implemented things like statutory acknowledgements for councils to recognise areas of cultural importance, and also highlighted the history for iwi in those areas and other statutory legal functions to recognise tino rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga. It's an interesting area.
It is, absolutely. If I can turn to you, Jenna, in terms of the desire from council to work with the iwi in the region in terms of a shared vision, what's been behind that?
It's a really long story, really, if you get into it. And I also want to speak a little bit to the question that you just put to Anika, or the potential observation around their ability to contribute post-settlement. That's because the settlement, like Anika alluded to, created tools that council could become familiar with that enabled iwi to have better influence. Before then, influence was few and far between. So I guess that's what the treaty settlements have done. They've created a Pakeha worldview or a European set of tools that councils are very familiar with, that they can kind of use as a guiding set. So you could say that in times gone by, why would the council be here? Probably because they had to. And yet, I have to be honest, like, it hasn't always been a particularly willing environment over time. But what I'm observing now is a real shift and acknowledgement of the importance of te taiao to iwi, but also really just councils and iwi are so well aligned. They just can't really see it. What we value and what we're here for and how intergenerational we are, we're really all here for the same things. But there are things that make it complex, which is why what is such an obvious thing doesn't always play out in an obvious way.
And I guess I think it's the River and Freshwater Advisory Committee, is the establishment of those sorts of committees is a very Western sort of approach, and that enables that conversation with local iwi, such that you've got tangata whenua round the table participating in those planning conversations.
Those sorts of tools are the catalyst. Yeah, they're the things that brought nervous, potentially reluctant entities to the table. But I mean, tides are changing, which is a beautiful thing. And so, yeah, looking forward, it's the unity, the kotahitanga, there's power in numbers.
So what is that unity and the unity that enables a shared vision to be developed? What have you needed to do to enable progress?
I'd say it's a work in progress. I always need to give context to my answers. I think it's always really important in this space. I spend a lot of time listening to different people and different perspectives, and especially working in a political environment, I have to respect that. But I listened to one of our local elected members speak recently, and she referred to power doesn't let go of power. And councils have been empowered through legislation and bits and pieces to undertake roles. And it's funny, you give them this power and then there is a real nervousness about letting it go. And I guess you can only ease or address that nervousness through open-mindedness and trust. And I think that stuff doesn't come overnight. And that's why I talk about it being a work in progress.
The nervousness, Anika, hearing Jenna talk about it perhaps from the council perspective, was there an equal or a similar nervousness from iwi to be involved in the conversations?
Well, I think, like Jenna said, there's always a context to the story. So when we're talking about a meeting of council with iwi, there's layers of history behind the relationship, and that comes from a place of inequality, essentially. The nervousness is, I don't think we have nervousness. We're a fighting people. We've been fighting for years around what we believe in and what our values are. So if anything, the nervousness is around how we can improve things moving forward. So yeah, I think there's definitely, as Jenna said, a shift, and the tides are changing. It's just the acknowledgement of what has happened, looking back to then look forward to be able to think solutions focused around how we can better work together and come up with a culturally safe environment to work in.
So in developing that culturally safe environment, are there particular initiatives that have been adopted?
For iwi, there's always been a level of education. We've taken on that role to educate staff or individuals or groups of people around, what our bottom lines are, what our values are, what our priorities are for the environment, for the taiao. And we have had recently, we had a hui with the councils, an induction, whereby that was, we were setting a bit of a scene for, what iwi's expectations are with the new councillors, new staff.
And thinking about some of the challenges in terms of, maybe there are different values or different timeframes for different values. Is that something, Jenna and Anika, that you observe?
Yeah, it's really interesting. This morning we've just had a meeting with our executive leadership team and our senior leadership group, and we invited a range of speakers, but two of them were, one was the general manager of Ngāti Tama and a trustee board trustee of Ngāti Tama, and to come in and speak about Ngāti Tama's journey to Te Tauihu, talking about leadership, their aspirations, and a really captivating speech for an hour. And what was really interesting, at no point through there was there a high priority on contributing to council's engagement processes or helping with this particular policy or that particular policy. It was about the well-being of their people, their, the environment and those sorts of things. So I think from a council perspective, and I'm speaking more from a council staff perspective, we can get lost in our own, I use the term widgets, whatever it is we're trying to deliver on behalf of the council and the community, we can get lost in those demands, and we think that that's where everyone's head's at. And I think what was really powerful about the presentation this morning is it was a reminder that iwi are so holistic, and really quite strategic, intergenerationally strategic. So this policy that's going to be in place for 3 years or whatever it is somewhat a blip on the radar. So I would say, yeah, there's misalignments, I've observed anyway.
I can see the 3-year term, and even if it was at some point in the future a 4 or a 5-year term, that relative to the generational perspectives, or the, I have a 100-year plan that Tangata Whenua might, be thinking in those sorts of terms. It's quite frustrating, to have to deal with the sort of I need to engage with this person on this project and this person on that one to hit my timeframes.
I'm smiling because I think Anika could probably say it is quite frustrating working with us. And I know, and I'm sure she had talked to this, she's very visionary. She sees and brings a holistic way of thinking that a council by its very structure really struggles with. And they're really hard things to weave together. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Anika?
Yeah, I think the beauty of iwi is that we're across every aspect of council, not because we choose to, but just, like Jenna said, it's the nature of the system. So for example, we have been working a little bit around the Motueka Awa, and there's obviously a lot of projects happening with the Motueka Awa at the moment, and so we've been finding ourselves in hui after hui with a range of different staff from council, and that wasn't a good way of working in terms of our time and the value that we can bring, and being so under capacity and under resourced. So we actually pushed back, and council in the meantime have been coming up with a plan of how to be, how to come together and bring their teams within the freshwater space together to come to us to discuss the hour as a whole. So and that, to me, like having a bigger view of what are the priorities for the hour can feed into these different work programs, and be more strategic instead of sort of a bit of an ad hoc fashion, I suppose. But that's one example, and there's plenty more where that came from. But in terms of values, I think for iwi it is about we're sort of born into this position. It's not a 9-to-5 job, you go home and you switch off. It's actually, there's a deeper connection, and I think that can be an incredible thing, but also very challenging as well, because it's you have, you're resting on the shoulders of your tupuna and your ancestors, and then you also have a collective of people around you, behind you, that you're representing. And so it's it means that there's more at stake, I think, when we're having these discussions, and possibly that's a differentiation between council and iwi.
Over the reforms and the conversations throughout the motu over the last couple of years, co-governance and shared responsibility have perhaps been one of the most misunderstood and perhaps the most controversial parts of the water reform conversation. How are Tangata Whenua and council viewing your relationship Is it an aspiration for co-governance?
I think just to begin with, co-governance, co-management, a lot of those terms have been politicised, so they are quite, there's a lot of, how would you describe it, contention around them. But I think first and foremost for iwi, it is about tino rangatiratanga and self-determination to have decision-making over a body of water. And so the kōrero, or the discussion around rights over water is happening, at the national level. It's happening with our iwi chairs, it's happening at a whole range of different levels. And I don't think our nation has really come to any solution around that. Co-management is probably where I can see where we're operating at, where we're coming up with a plan that's co-designed or written with iwi and council staff.
I think Anika's opening was a really important one, where those terms have become really political. And so I don't have a mandate to say what appetite Tasman District Council has for co-governance, because I don't think people really understand what co-governance is. And I think the more I've thought about it, the more I dislike the term. And I kind of think about where I see the breakdowns in the current system is if I think about the influence and the space that we have given to iwi Māori to exercise tino rangatiratanga, it's very small. And so when you say this is the small sphere of influence you've got, give us a yes or no on this, quite often it's a no, because they can only influence this. They don't have any ability to ensure the other protections that go alongside such a decision will be upheld. Councils, if we've got to be honest here, if we look back, I'm not talking just about Tasman District Council, but if we look at councils and governments, they haven't been honourable. So for us to say, trust us, just, give us a yes in this little sphere here, it's an unrealistic expectation. And so when I think about co-governance or the concept of it, my mind kind of wanders more to kotahitanga and to unity and to shared responsibility, and that genuine collaboration where you are going, okay, right, housing. How are we going to solve housing? Not, hey, here's an FTS and can you please give us advice on this parcel of land? Actually go, lift us up to the big level. So that's a personal kind of aspiration. And we were in a hui yesterday in Mohua Golden Bay, and a beautiful reflection came from one of our customer service officers when we were on the marae, and she said, why do we even talk about co-governance? Why does it have to be co-governance? Like, we should be trying to redefine this as governance. Like, it should be just, should be part of our identity. It shouldn't be a big deal. So, I mean, there's some beautiful kōrero around and thoughts, and but it does take a little bit of courage, a lot of trust.
Thank you. Maybe if I can now turn us towards the wastewater management, and in particular the management of wastewater in Nelson. Nathan, how is the kōrero going in terms of what needs to happen?
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. I think we've got at the start of a really good set of discussions going on. We are starting to create a shared value going forward. I think there's a long way to go yet. I mean, there's a lot of conversations to be had, and we have the thing that we've struggled with, and I think we still struggle with it, is we each have our own sort of silos and our own sort of responsibilities, let's say, and they don't always pass in the same direction. So my perception is that my principal responsibility as the manager of a wastewater system is to protect the public health. That's my single largest responsibility. And so if that actually goes contrary to something else, then I have to take that principal responsibility, first. But it doesn't stop me from trying to do the best that I can do and to provide leadership, or, I totally agree with Jenna's perspective that this is governance. I personally don't understand what co-governance means. I don't dig deep into those sorts of things. If we can provide leadership or governance, and guidance that gets us towards a goal. And I'm a very strong believer in having a really aspirational goal. Now, I'm a technical expert in wastewater treatment, but I don't know about what cultural good, looks like in our region. And so that's part of the reason I have to have this conversation and keep that communication going so that we understand what good looks like, so we can have an aspirational goal. And then look far enough out. Another thing that's always really difficult in these situations is most of the time the interactions have been really tactical interactions. We are going for a resource consent. We need to consult with iwi about a resource consent, but a lot of the times the answer has already been decided. And the reason that's the case is because there's a lot of money at stake. And what I don't want to do is continue to leave that really short-term thinking there. And I want to change it and get away from the short-term money stuff and say, if we've got a 50 or 100-year vision for this, let's put that really aspirational vision out there and what this looks like, so that every tactical decision I make today takes me closer to that future, not somewhere else away from that future, aspirational goal. And so what I'm trying to do is contextualize the problem and remove the today issues, because we are, Anika and I are involved in resource consenting, and we will butt heads on the short-term tactical stuff, because I have a set of responsibilities that might be different than her sets of responsibilities. But it doesn't stop us being able to set a huge long-term vision and actually then putting our resources together to try and get to that long-term vision over time. So I think we've got a really great starting point, and we've got a cool journey to go on.
Thank you. Can I ask you, Anika? Nathan talked about some of the cultural values, or saying the need to understand the cultural values. I'm conscious that some of the people who are perhaps listening to this podcast won't be, fully abreast of the types of matters that are particularly important to iwi when it comes to wastewater.
I can only really speak for my iwi and Ngāti Rāua. But we have, as part of this work, we have been collaborating with iwi of Te Tauihu to come up with, what our positions statements are around human wastewater. And so, what are the issues? What are the priorities for moving forward? And so in terms of Te Ao Māori values around wastewater, a lot of it really comes back down to maintaining the mauri of our waterways, the health of our coastal marine area or tributaries. But there are some fundamental aspects to wastewater, which is that, to have tiko or waste in the estuarine or the moana or the marine or the freshwater environments is basically offensive, because that's an area that we harvest kai. So there's issue around mahinga kai areas and places where we go to harvest, and then having your tūtai or your waste in those areas. So practically that's one of the most common sort of issues for iwi. But of course, like many of us within the community, there's other issues that, around coastal inundation, climate change, a range of things.
When you talk about the mauri of the waterways, I wonder if the introduction of the Te Mana o Te Wai into the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management has helped, because it's introduced that concept and about the importance of water first, and that's enabled a broader conversation at the council level.
Te Mana o Te Wai is definitely a interesting kaupapa and obviously groundbreaking, and to have something like that implemented into national policy and then feed down into local government is quite amazing. So it's, you know, a lot of our kupu Māori that get used within those political arenas, you know, there is, I guess, the expectation to ensure that those things are implemented correctly. So, yeah, I think it's an amazing piece of work, and we've been working around on a case study here in Te Tauihu around what Te Mana o Te Wai means to us. That it's how do you convey that to council when council have to adhere to that within their sort of planning and policy. So I think that's the challenging part, but that's also the opportunity in terms of working with council to understand what that means. But it is a great pathway for us to be able to demonstrate what Te Mana o Te Wai means in terms of wastewater. You know, that is about ensuring our bottom lines or our non-negotiables sort of out on the table. So things like protecting, you know, wahi tapu sites, ensuring the mahinga kai, that the water quality is at a level where we can go and harvest from areas that have probably been degraded over time. So, but also, you know, things like monitoring, where iwi are able to go out and do their own cultural monitoring of areas, things like that. So it creates a discussion and an environment for our iwi kaitiaki to then be able to implement kaitiakitanga.
Nathan, you talked about how you sort of accept, perhaps with an element of realism, that at times over tactical decisions, there may be the butting of heads at times. I'm conscious that whilst the conversations have been happening with Tangata Whenua, that the council applied and was granted a resource consent to discharge treated wastewater into the Waimea estuary, I think for another 20 years. How did that impact the relationship? I mean, when it was happening, subsequently?
I think that was a little bit prior, or to the conversation really starting off properly. I wasn't the general manager of the regional sewage business unit at the time that consent was being negotiated. I only joined at the end of that process. And one of the cool things that we've been able to do in that process is that while we got a consent, for 20 years for essentially doing what we are already doing, and I think it's really important that we can do that, because we've got to safeguard the right to continue to treat and dispose wastewater. We also identified a piece of land and it came on the market. We actually went out and bought that. It wasn't in our plan. It was something that sort of spurred from the conversations that we'd been having through the resource consenting process with iwi. And we actually bought 64 hectares of land for a land application zone for wastewater, for treated wastewater. And it's sort of, it posed to me as I started with the organisation, that what should we be doing to do better? How can we generally look at the future and say, what does better look like? And one of my first activities was when I joined, is to create my own vision of the future, using my own technical background. And it wasn't in relation, you didn't discuss it all with iwi and everybody else. I just said, what does better look like for me? And then I put that to the board and we came up with this plan. And that part of that was to reuse resources where we possibly could. I mean, that was collecting water, reusing on land, and we put that in place and we got that in. And then, we one of the big things was at the time we identified we had some capacity constraints in our network. And so, we can talk about the disposal, but it was way worse from my principal responsibility, which is public health, to have all the pump stations overflowing every time it rained. So a lot of our money initially went into, and we've got a large program of duplicating and increasing our resilience of our collection and conveyancing system, and that's nearly finished now. And it didn't stop us then, when we did that, to say, well, actually our long-term future is to reuse water. So when we put those new pipes in, we actually put in a reuse pipe beside them, So we actually doubling down and saying, well, our long-term future is to reuse wastewater. It's going to cost us 5 cents on the dollar to put this piece of pipe in when we've got a hole dug. Let's do it now while we can. And so it's necessary to be thinking really far out to be able to get the benefits of that. And we then went back and said, okay, so what do we need to do now to actually understand what good looks like more broadly, not just on my Pākehā or my Western perspective and my scientific perspective, but actually from a cultural and a social perspective. And that's where the conversation started off. We talked to TDC and we talked about a special consultation process, and actually starting to really get involved with iwi to understand what we could set for a long-term vision or a long-term goal, so we could work towards it. And for me, that's where we are in the process of that now. Because of my perspective, if we don't have a goal, it's going to be really hard to get there.
Anika, what's your view of that?
We are in a position now where we can work together and integrate, cultural views and values. There's still a system that we're dealing with that has to continue on, and that's just because it's there already and we've got existing infrastructure. But I think the challenge is, how do we, come up with that vision in terms of what best practice is for the future. So I think there is, definitely potential in that shared vision and shared aspiration. So it's going to require leadership and also people who can think beyond the 3-year term to be able to think, okay, well, how about in 20, 30 years time, what does it look like for us? I mean, we might have to retreat anyway. So I think that's where we're at right now, is that, we've had a bit of a fickle relationship. And as Nathan said, we're normally involved through the resource consent process, but this is a proactive way of coming up with a solution. So it's not business as usual. It's actually, we've stepped outside of that to be able to create a process to, develop some foundations for quite a interesting vision. Yeah, so I think that's really exciting.
That was Anika Young, Ho Tohu Tohu Taia o Te Runanga o Ngāti Rārua. Also taking part in the discussion was Jenna Neem, Chief Operations Officer at Tasman District Council, Nathan Clark, General Manager of Regional Services for Nelson City Council, and Water New Zealand Chief Executive, Gillian Blythe. Thanks for listening to Tāwara Otiwai.